Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of April, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you from the settlement of Krasnogorovka. If you see how you see the map, we have updated it, but now let's discuss in order what happened here. Before we start, let's just increase the number of updates with you again from yesterday's date from the 15th. Or just for the 15th of April. And remember, yesterday we discussed with you. Considered with you the picture of the presence of a huge number of artillery strikes in the central part, in the southern part of Krasnogorovka. Yesterday, we made the assumption that for sure all these strikes were some kind of artillery training, elements of artillery training. And we expected and discussed with you that in the near future, we should expect a strike from the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the positions of Ukraine. And today we received the first geolocation, which confirms that this offensive did happen, that the blow was still inflicted on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Moreover, the blow was quite powerful, quite successful. The first thing we received was footage published by the armed forces of Ukraine. These shots were published today in the district. Last night in the evening, they began to be published in the area. We added them to the map around 5 in the morning, and in these frames, we see with you the artillery strikes by gunners in the USU on the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, in the northern part of southern Krasnogorovka. That is, well, to be honest, to look purely at these shots, it is very difficult to draw conclusions. That strikes are being carried out on the positions of the Russian army. That is, some kind of building, gunners are hitting the building, and the author actually claims that the blow was inflicted with the use of HIMARS, well, that is, some kind of porridge, and some nonsense, to be honest. But the footage here was published here. And today, during the day, a little later, the full video was published. The video was published again by the same resource. In these frames, we can observe another attempt of the offensive of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the Krasnogorovka area. More precisely, to be more precise, during the past offensive operations that took place a few days ago. Remember, with the use of this huge tank, completely preserved in armor. That's when we managed to get into the southeastern part of Krasnogorka, into the southern part of Krasnogorka. Managed to gain a foothold there and somehow hold out, dig in, repel the APU counterattacks. And after the consolidation itself had already taken place on the achieved borders. After it was possible to suppress the artillery of the armed forces of Ukraine, to push them further north, after all these measures, the Russian army launched a new offensive. More precisely, this is not even an offensive, most likely they just threw additional resources, additional reserves, additional forces into Krasnogorovka itself in order to consolidate even more widely and capture even more territories in the southern southeastern part. It seems that the Russian fighters pass almost unhindered along the northern part of the railway. They drive deep into the western part of southern Krasnogorka, after which the deployment takes place. Then there is an attempt to consolidate. The walls are broken, the landing party lands safely. Here we see troops landing on farms, positions are being occupied, some walls are breaking down with tanks, that is, well, the bridgehead is being brought into some kind of correspondence for further normal activity. Then a few more, as you can see, there was reinforcement, here's another wave after the first one went. And so endlessly launched. The infantry dismounted, took up positions, and already at the very end, in the last frames, we see these artillery strikes that we saw with you initially. We see Russian fighters entrenched on the ground, and after a successful landing, a successful expansion of the bridgehead, Russian equipment left the southern southeastern Krasnogorovka. In other words, these shots allowed us to finally paint over the southern bridgehead, almost 80% red. Although if you ask my opinion, I am almost 99% sure that this part of Krasnogorovka, including, is under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. We just didn't get geolocation. Perhaps there is no control of the Russian army here, but at least there is also no Ukrainian soldier. Surely they have already left the southern part, perhaps they left some rearguard troops, in order to delay the advancing Russian orders for as long as possible, for a couple of minutes, for a couple of hours. But in any case, everything is already in Krasnogorovka, in the southern part, it is so for sure. The central part, of course, the fighting has not yet begun, but they are not far off. Footage of the work of Russian aviation is being published, to be more precise, according to the author of the video. And the author of this video, attack helicopters, hit the IFU positions in the Krasnogorsk area of the central part, with a large use of missiles, and in general, as you can see, the central part is under constant fire. And offensive actions do not stop here. In the near future, assaults will probably resume, with the aim of entering the industrial zone itself, the very central part of the Krasnogorsk refractory plant. If the armed forces of the Russian Federation manage to break through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine, and enter this fire-burning plant, and approximately establish control along this red line in the south and central part, then there will literally remain in the northern part. Well, it will already be much easier, and, in principle, they themselves will be forced to retreat from the eastern part of Krasnogorovka, from high rises, because they will be very far from the main supply routes, from the main supply roads. In general, there will be very high risks of being surrounded, so if the operation is successfully completed for the central part, for the refractory plant, the whole Krasnogorsk will slowly begin to collapse. That is, the APU will gradually roll back as close as possible to the main supply routes, so that at the time of receiving the order as quickly and promptly as possible to leave the direction towards the west, let's say, to the settlements of Alexandropol, Zaryannaya, and Kurakovka. But we see with you that the situation is quite dynamic, it is developing very quickly, and for sure in the near future. The pace will only accelerate. Then we are moving with you on the northern to the Mayday direction. There is also a lot of interesting information coming in here. There are several updates on the locality itself, not Tylova. Literally from the very morning, we received news and footage that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to enter the very settlement of Tylova. As if we are talking in fact, for the first building on the street, without Karavany Street. Here on these sites the first houses are already under the control of the Russian army. Individual cartographers also update their maps and confirm this information. That is, if we sum up everything that we have as of the evening, let's say on the 16th of April, then as of now approximately such a picture can be observed in the locality of Ney Tylova. That is, if, of course, the consolidation was successful on the first streets, then of course further progress is expected. Let me remind you that the other day the armed forces of the Russian Federation broke the dams in the Charles Reservoir, including establishing fire control over the main supply route, which goes, let's say, from Seladov in the direction of Nidalu. Then here in general the situation is developing quite dynamically. However, despite all these conversations, all these, let's say, without confirmation of the news, a very interesting, let's say, update. A very interesting update was provided today by Ribber, a military expert who claims that the armed forces of the Russian Federation, after they had fully established control over Pervomaysky, decided, well, further how it would be logical in general, to move further along the central street in the direction of Novolsky. That is, in this direction, in these fields, in these gardens, there was movement. But not the army in order to collapse this artillery bag. This turns out to be an artillery trap, in which there were still a certain number of fighters in the USU. And according to its data as of the evening of April 16, 2024 year, armed the forces of the Russian Federation have reached approximately this control. That is a significant breakthrough. And according to his data, there are still fighters in the USU located in this cauldron who did not have time to leave their positions, and are unlikely to have time at the moment. In other words, it was somehow just as unexpected. It is unexpected for me in the sense that why in the USU, seeing the developing situation, they did not leave this bridgehead a few weeks ago, and the second time they managed to break through the position. Did another brigade, or another battalion, or some company, or some platoon leave the position again without waiting orders from the command, thereby substituted another group in the environment? At the moment, this is actually quite often such a situation. Just yesterday, we were talking about the situation developing in the 67th Mechanized Brigade, the 25th Brigade. And today they are already saying that the 115th has sailed. The 115th, to be more precise, are not here, they are located in the northern direction, in the area of Oshcheretinav, and it was because of the 115th Brigade that this mess, collapse and simply firm the molecule of the Raven Novo-Mikhailovka-Chereden front, actually happened. It is precisely because of the fact that the fighters from the 115th Mechanized Brigade have now surrendered their positions. The soldiers of the 47th Mechanized Brigade also held the defensive lines of the position for quite a long time and tightly. Let's say they drank a lot of blood from the soldiers of the Russian army who tried to storm the Berdik-Stepovai. We can simply increase the number of updates from the 1st of March, and in general, you will understand what is being discussed. Just pay attention to the hundreds of drone strikes. I think you've seen all these shots. If you have access to the map, you can view them. A huge number of fighters of the Russian army really stayed here, trying to storm Berdik-Stepov. But at some point, the Russian army carried out this, let's say legendary, probably another legendary assault, in the area of Novokalinov. After which it was necessary to transfer part of the reserves, part of the units of the Novokalinov stabilizations. And somehow in this way overslept, the Ukrainian army overslept the blow of Russian fighters in the area of the Q. At the moment of, let's say, the Novokalinov maneuver, and it was the positions of the 115th Brigade that floated. From a distance, they have positions here, and Russian fighters have already reached the outskirts of Novobakhmutovka itself. And according to most very reliable cartographers of the pro-Ukrainian, neutral, and pro-Russian armed forces of the Russian Federation, currently fully controls the Dacha village between the railway. We are not changing the map yet in terms of changing the color from yellow to red, but we are already showing it as a neutral zone. As a gray zone, yes. That is, very quickly of course, progress, for sure there will be consolidation, cleaning, but in any case of course. This is just an indescribable achievement just in a few days of fighting. And I repeat once again, the 115th Brigade sailed. According to the news and such internal backstage discussions in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. And as we can see from geolocation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation do not plan to stop, the movement is maximum. While there is still an opportunity to move further on the shoulders of the retreating AFU fighters, it is planned to move further to Novaya Bakhmutovka, and strikes are already being carried out on the settlement, which is located behind on Bakhmutovka with the use of multiple launch rocket systems, in order to suppress the reserves of reinforcements, which probably began with endless streams of Sladey Bakhmut, in order to stabilize the front line, prevent a breakthrough and exit even to the southern outskirts of the settlement of the Q, which is absolutely not ready for defense, since even according to the understandings, it's about to imagine what the same fighters in the Q think, who assume that the fighting they are being conducted somewhere in Semenovka, about Uman, Berdik, and then Russian fighters run into the Q. They are simply not physically ready to take the frontiers in vain, including to begin defense for a locality. There is something very strange going on here, very strange, and the fact that it is very strange. While there is no way to stop the APU in any way, we see with you that there is a breakthrough Krasnogorsk-Kravka, Pervomeyskaya and Oshcheretina, and the second one is simple in fact. The second one is the second line of defense. The second line of defense in the ISU is falling before our eyes. The activity of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is noted in the South American direction. So far, no active assault actions have been taken for Western Novomikhailovka. Russian fighters align the front line along the northern flank, drive up the next forest belt, and, in fact, go out to Proskoveka. Even earlier than to Novomikhailovka. After the victory in the ISU, realizing that in the near future, it is worth expecting from their side an attempt to align the front further along approximately this line, and this is already fraught with a collapse of the lid from the upper boiler to Konstantinovka, so the APU in some attempts are trying to counterattack the Russian positions in victory, since they are very close, very there are strong points nearby. And in general, well, unsuccessfully. But there is still some point of tension present, which in general constantly distracts. and constantly forces us to look back in order to prevent a breakthrough and collapse of the Russian defense line. Not from the point of view that it is possible to move further to Donetsk from here, but from that point the point of view is that it will be very difficult to win back these frontiers from now on. Then we are moving with you to the Bakhmut-Artemovsky direction, from where a huge amount of news also comes. Today, footage was also published, and while at 5, everyone is racking their brains, trying to understand what happened along the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Recently, this Khortytsky Wind, this Telegram channel, if you follow it, you know it, has published a huge amount of geolocation frames, almost everything. If you and I take the change in the front line over the past 3 weeks. Now, if you try to trace the change in the front line over the past 3 weeks on the basis of geolocations, then you will notice that it was this resource, this Khortytsky Wind, this resource, that published all geolocations, on the basis of which all cartographers, excluding deep state, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, neutral, correct their maps, including fish. Everything was done simply as a charmed one on the basis of this resource. And he published a lot of interesting information about Krasnogorovka, including all these shots that we discussed with you about Krasnogorovka, about the attack. They were also published by this resource. You can recognize him by this account, and the cornflower, the red cornflower on this account. It's like a symbol. That's it. Please note that on the basis of these frames, all cartographers have changed the map in Krasnogorsk. Absolutely everything, yes. If we take any other frame, even let's say yesterday's footage, when we watched with you as the armed forces of the Russian Federation entered the same Osharatina, pay attention, they published the footage again. That is, well, a very interesting situation is really happening from some point of view. Here you see again, without exception, all the latest geolocation adjustments along the front line, I repeat again, sorry, yes, are made on the basis of frames of one Telegram channel and pro-Ukrainian. It's actually very strange for me. I see that people are starting to ask questions because, well, it's kind of weird really. Isn't this some kind of incomprehensible situation? And now, personally, I am already asking questions, including, I warn you, viewers of the Military Reports channel. Other Telegram channels, be very, very careful and very, very attentive. It seems to me that there are some moments that perhaps this is being done on purpose. Why? I'll explain it to you now. Again, today the same channel publishes footage with the caption frame that is applied here is an image of an armed position in the area. With the help of the NPR, yes. In other words, the footage shows how some kind of strikes are being carried out on a warehouse in the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal area. And already on the basis of these shots, everyone without exception, as pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, neutral, pro-Martian, pro-Plutonian, pro-Saturn, pro-Cassipian resources, began to ask questions about how the Russian fighters managed to get there to the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal. And this same source, I remind you, literally there was also such a huge scandal. Just the worst scandal among all cartographers regarding Burdyk. Literally, at the beginning of April, footage of strikes on Burdyk's was published. And remember, I also showed you, a shell is flying here from the Russian positions. Again, I show that the same source claims that it was the Ukrainian grads who were hitting the Russian positions. And then, too, half of the cartographer changed the maps, updated them, like they got here. But in fact, they messed up. Either they messed up, or maybe they messed up on purpose. We are deliberately misleading. In other words, you need to take a closer look and understand what is really going on. And that's why we need to be very careful, especially now, when there are breakthroughs, when many are making the basics conclusions based on all these frames, and perhaps someone uses frames from common available sources, with an understanding of where what is happening, and how to navigate the terrain. So let's go back to our whole story again. Here, the footage is published by the same sources that the blow is on the Russian positions, yes. Some of them, of course, hurried to paint, replace the map, then Ukrainian sources began to write yes. This cannot be for the simple reason that there is a bridge here, and if there really were Russian positions, then it would be advisable to destroy the bridge and not leave it intact for Russian troops. That is, well, a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers. But in any case, all the same, I will even say again about this source, here is today's story in Krasnogorovka. Today, all cartographers have already slowed down a little bit on this whole story. Here again, the same source publishes footage of strikes at first just on some building, and claims that they are striking the positions of the Russian troops of Krasnogorka. But in these frames you will not see a single Russian soldier. None at all. And everyone ran to quickly change their cards. But again, how can you do it? And suddenly it's like in the same story, blows are struck. Just the author confused, or deliberately misleads. But of course later, a few hours later, they published the full version. The movement of Russian equipment is already clearly visible here. But again, that is strange. And if you ask my opinion, then based on previous experience, there is a slight assumption to me, and still a tendency to the fact, that indeed Russian troops managed to get to the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal at least by saboteurs or specialists. Because we have repeatedly noted that Russian troops were advancing along the railway the last day. It was in this direction that the movement was going under Zelenka. Under the cover of Zelenka, in order not to get hit by mortars, not to get hit by drones in Beer. In order to have some kind of cover and maybe the Russian army entered, reached the canal. And in general, how else would this be explained in terms of the fact that the history of the 67th Brigade, which abandoned its positions, abandoned its brothers in this named district. Perhaps this is the site where the 67th Brigade abandoned its positions and fled, abandoning equipment. And these positions were so easily captured by the Russian army. It's not clear yet. As you can see, we have updated the map. We do not paint it red, that is, this control of the Russian army. But we have also removed the yellow color of the control of the Ukrainian army. We have left a gray area for more details, for a better understanding of what is really happening here, or has happened. But in any case, the situation is developing extremely interesting. According to the very clock itself, the further advance of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is marked by separate cartographers in the eastern quarter. It is in this part that a separate frame of strikes, and in Beer by disembodied fighters of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, is published. That is, there are contradictory shots. Perhaps there are small problems with timings, when what happened, in what period of time, but in any case, the information is confirmed that the Russian army is storming the eastern Clock Yar. Well, the situation is very complicated. The situation is developing extremely dynamically. Yesterday, we were discussing leaflets that are being dropped from the disembodied with a call to surrender. In principle, it is not only in Chasiv that the Russian army is now using this tactic in all directions. There are problems with communication here, and therefore it was decided by the command to drop these leaflets before each offensive. We have seen in the harvest, in Staromayorsky, now in the Yar. And in general the situation here is developing extremely unpleasant. Strikes are being carried out on Bogdanovka, or rather on its very southwestern outskirts. Assault operations are underway. So far, calls to Kalinovka or to the farm in Bogdanovka have not been confirmed. The Clock Yar is regularly struck by multiple launch rocket systems. The settlement is equal. They do not allow you to rest, sleep, prepare. Everything is tense under a big tension. Of course, well, it's hard to believe that before May 9th, Russian troops will be able to take the entire Yar, but, at least in the eastern part, from the hour of Yar until the holidays of May 9th, and until Orthodox Easter, of course it will go. Of course it will, and this is most likely more than obvious. At the same time, footage is being published. Some sources are publishing some footage of the retreat of the USU fighters. Large detachments are retreating from the position there. They are simply rushing headlong at the maximum permissible speed of the Policy terrain. Drones are watching them and constantly flying. Well, here the situation is developing in some interesting way like this. And Siersky, after all, again confirms the information about the disbandment of the 67th Brigade. After all, they have annoyed, and now there is honestly some kind of conflict going on inside the Ukrainian army. And it is interesting that the conflict is on the ground. Well, the whole Ukrainian army is divided into two parts. These are the ones that are, well, just mobilized and ideological. Well, like everywhere else, all over the world, everything is divided into ordinary people and ideological ones, yes. Now the seventh one is supposedly there, let's say, the indigenous ideological fighters. And now they are trying to disband them. They certainly disagree. They claim that they wanted to set them up, just destroy the brigade, give them up for nothing. Well, it's unclear how the story will develop further, but in any case, the situation continues to develop. Then we are moving with you to the Seversk direction, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue their slow-moving offensive. Artillery strikes are being carried out, air strikes are being carried out, forest belts are being cleaned up. So far, there have been no active, let's say, offensives on the ground. Along Belogorka, the eastern, northwestern, and western, let's say, shores of the base given from the chalk dump, are gradually being cleaned up without any attempts to attack on the ground. There is no news in the Ternentor direction, in the South Kopensky direction, in the North Kopensky direction, as well as no news. The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to strike at the opposition of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Goptovka. And for the second day in a row, the Russian army is trying to clean up this stronghold here. Most likely, the North group of troops is working, and it is trying to clean up the border area. The closest zone there, say, 1 or 3 kilometers. Perhaps in the near future it will try to storm and expand, already create this sanitary buffer zone. This is not an easy process, it will be a difficult process, since there are already experienced fighters in the USU. Well, this is their Russian army, of course, experienced, but it will not be the 22nd year here, of course. It's not going to be easy to run here. There will be a similar opening of the front, routine work, but it is possible, which will lead to a rather serious and big result. And that's it, dear friends.